Hey everybody, it's great to be back after a 4-week absence due to the loss of my father. Thank you so much for your prayers and your condolences and for your continued support of UIO podcasts. On that note, I have some exciting news. Next Wednesday, May 20th, we have a new podcast coming out. It's the second of our special series. You might remember before my loss, we did get one podcast out. The first one in the series is called UIO on friendship, on coping with friendship during a crisis. This one is called UIO on rejection. Rejection is one of those things that looms large in our lives during the best of times and certainly in the worst of times. Rejection is going to rear its ugly head in sneaky ways. If you're anything like me, you find yourself feeling rejected when your friends don't text you back in 5 minutes, or when a family member doesn't have time for you. And so Naomi Richards, and she is known as the kids coach here in the UK, is our guest for this podcast. And she's going to talk to us about how to sidestep feeling this way, but also when we really do face rejection head on, how to cope with it. So we're very excited. So keep watching this space. Wednesday, May 20th, the podcast will be out on Apple Podcasts and all of the other channels as well. And you can also subscribe to our RSS feed on my website, sanjalewis.com. Meanwhile, I want to talk to you about social media etiquette around loss. That's what I want to talk about today. It's a hot topic, or at least it should be a hot topic. During this pandemic that we're experiencing, there has been unprecedented loss, and I don't mean exclusively human life loss, although it's the loss of a loved one that often calls for handling with special care on social media. Because social media tends to make any and everything very, very personal. But before I get to the heavy topic, I'm acutely aware that even those who haven't lost loved ones have lost something. Sometimes I think it feels a bit frivolous to us to focus on, or even acknowledge, not so much focus on, but acknowledge the loss that we've experienced because of lockdown. We've lost freedoms, the freedom of movement, the freedom of hanging out with our friends. And during our teenage years in particular, this is quite important, the social aspect of growing up. It has emotional and mental well-being implications. So these are quite big hits. And so I think it's important not to feel frivolous when we're talking about these, but to accept them as losses and to be able to deal with them. Because if I've learned anything from my bereavement, I've learned that it's so important to take care of oneself when you're feeling loss. It's key to self-worth, and it's key to good emotional and mental health. So I've adapted and I've learned a few things about myself. I certainly have learned that I'm a bit more resilient than I thought I was. But also, I've had to learn how to take care of my own hair in a pinch. And notice I said in a pinch because I'm quite happy to have it taken care of for me. Because whether it sounds frivolous or not, my hair, for example, and we'll just use me as an example, is very important not only to my physical well-being, but also my emotional and mental well-being, keeping it healthy. And that's key. And that's a big part of self-care. So take care of yourselves. Now to social media etiquette on loss of a loved one. It really calls for handling with special care off social media too. But as we spend more and more time connecting via social media, it's more crucial than ever to remember our mental and emotional health and the mental and emotional health of our friends and family members. First, everyone grieves differently and always has. That's just the way it is. Though there might be stages of grief, grief is very personal. And so no one can do it for you. Although friends and family can offer much needed support, we all have to grieve for ourselves and cope and come through it for ourselves. So I'm very encouraged by my friends and family members who share their grief publicly in their status, for example, on Facebook. I think it's wonderful if it serves them, though it is not the way that I grieve. But what I've noticed about those who successfully share their loss is that it's working for them. They somehow seem to be healing. And that many family members and friends are responding to them and interacting with them. They're leading, on this initiative. And it is, it's actually theirs. They own it. And almost always, the grief is around someone who is perhaps one degree of separation. And although I haven't asked the details of their process, I trust that they've checked with other family members to ensure that their post will not cause any mental anguish. And I think that's the key. So the first rule of social media etiquette is check with family before posting photographs, direct information, or even extending public condolences. Because if you're honest with yourself, the condolences are, after all, to the family, not the person who's gone. They can't see it. And if it causes mental anguish for the family members or one family member, you fail to extend your condolences. And I know that that's not really what we want. So no one wins. So keep condolences private if the family prefer. Next, if a family member asks you to remove a post, don't be offended by this. Remember, as I said, everyone grieves differently. And seeing a family member who has never been on social media plastered on there repeatedly, whether it's their name, their photographs, whatever it is, it's unsettling. And it impacts the emotional and mental health of the person who doesn't want that. And so again, if the idea is to extend condolences or, do something as a memorial, you haven't succeeded. Because if you're causing mental and emotional anguish to a family member, then no one wins. And that's not what I'm sure is intended. And I think the third point I want to make is that the cause of death is irrelevant unless you're the coroner, life insurance representative, or somebody who needs to know. Because loss is huge. The loss of my father, for example, it is huge. And I have to cope with that. And I'm sure other people will feel a similar thing because we all have to go through the grieving process. So during this pandemic in particular, people are under a great deal of duress, sort of a dark cloud, and to consistently bombard with unnecessary questions that trigger further grief and anxiety is unkind. And furthermore, to post it at your discretion can cause mental health problems for anyone. So again, if you're asked to refrain from engaging in activity about someone else's direct relative, consider it an act of kindness when you cease and desist. The key is to check with the family, even if you are in the family. And everyone is trying to heal in a very crowded space, and that's key to remember. And that's on social media, which is very crowded right now, but also mainly in our heads. We are spending a lot of time in our heads because that's mainly where we live right now. And that is exacerbated or multiplied many times over while we're grieving. If you're on the other side of this, like I am, kindly ask people to respect your privacy. There is no reason to conclude that they are intentionally being disrespectful or hurtful intentionally. But if you find them unwilling to cooperate, then avoid the space without causing further upset to yourself. There are different ways to do this, but one surefire way is to unfriend or block. And these are not cruel acts, but acts of kindness to yourself for your own mental health. And I'm still hoping that social media channels will throw on a bit more policing. But in the meantime, if the heat gets too hot, report it if it feels like it's abuse to you. Because again, the key thing here is self-care and taking good care of your emotional and mental health. It's all about emotional and mental well-being. And grief is something that is a big hit. And so it's so important to honor some type of social media etiquette, particularly, well, all the time, but at this time when we're dealing with so much more stress. Take care of you inside out, and remember it is UIO. Again, UIO on rejection is coming at you Wednesday. Can't wait to get it out there. And thank you so much for listening and watching this vlog. Thank you.